Are you considering buying a home? Join me today to go through the mechanics of a transaction so you know what is going to happen. Hey everyone, Roxanne here. Wanted to talk to you about the mechanics of a transaction because a lot of the times it's kind of confusing to know what happens and what you can expect once you go under contract. So wanted to go through these steps and basically walk you through a transaction, what happens, what you need to do, what you can expect. So first step is acceptance, of course. When you send an offer and if you're in California and you're dealing with multiple offer situations, which is basically the majority of the times, then once you get your offer accepted, that's a happy day. Now you have a house under contract. It's very exciting. Then what happens after that? What happens after that are a couple of different steps. Actually, I missed one. The very first one is you want to put your deposit in escrow, and the deposit is usually runs between 1% and 3% of the purchase price. So within 3 days of acceptance, the buyer has to put that money into escrow. Then after that comes the contingency periods. Most important contingencies are physical inspection, appraisal, and loan. These are the most important, but there are other contingencies as well. For example, you want to make sure you have a clean title. If it's a condo, you want to make sure the HOA is solvent and all that good stuff. But today we're just going to concentrate on physical inspection, appraisal, and loan. Appraisal and physical inspection has to happen within the first 17 days. Now again, I'm only talking about a contract in California, and for those two contingencies, the buyer has 17 days to do their investigation, satisfy themselves, either cancel with no penalties or move forward. And in the case of physical inspection, again, you can go back and forth. You can do a general inspection. You can bring all other kinds of experts to look at the property, but you have to do all of that within 17 days. But that doesn't mean that on day 17 you're basically losing your deposit or you're stuck in the transaction. No. Because you have to, in writing, give to the seller a form that says, now I've removed my contingencies, I'm committed to buying this house. Once you do that, then you are committed. But before that, even if 17 day comes and goes and the seller doesn't push you to remove your contingency, go to day 18, nothing happens, you can still get out of that contract. So what's the 21 day? 21 day is for the loan. So you have 17 days for physical inspection and appraisal, but you have an extra 3 days for your loan, just because loan could be more complicated. The contract gives the buyer a couple more days. So again, we come to these contingencies have to be removed in writing for them to be do or die. Otherwise, the contract keeps going. Of course, if you're the seller, you should make sure you button things up and get the buyer to remove those contingencies. Request for repairs. Request for repairs has to happen within this 17-day contingency period. And the most critical thing about request for repairs is credit. So let's say you have you do an inspection and you find a bunch of items that need repair. So the better way to deal with repairs is to ask for credit, because you never know if the seller is going to do a DIY job on it that is not satisfactory to your standards, or they may do a repair but the repair doesn't quite fix the problem, and then you have to once you close the transaction you have to deal with it again. So the best way to deal with any sort of repair situations is to ask for a credit. And when you're asking for a credit, it's critical to make sure that escrow finds out about that credit amount, because escrow is the party that has to make sure that credit actually goes from the seller to the buyer. So once that credit is negotiated between the buyer and seller, escrow has to know about it. So if you are the buyer's agent, you got to make sure that the credit gets communicated to escrow, otherwise it's not going to happen. And when it doesn't happen, it gets very complicated, because you don't want a whole lot of drama throughout the transaction. And if that credit is not dealt with properly, you're going to have a lot of drama, either during the transaction or most likely afterwards. And the more that you can take care of everything throughout the transaction, the better it is, because you want things to be clean and smooth afterwards. Settlement statement. Settlement statement basically is a statement that deals with all the charges that belong to the buyer, all the charges that belong to the seller. And in the case of this credit that we're talking about, if you get this settlement statement from escrow is the one that prepares this. If you get it from escrow, then you make sure that all your items are on that settlement statement. Nothing gets lost. Everything is the way that you expect. There are no extra charges. There are no deletions, and everybody's happy. Final walkthrough. Final walkthrough or verification of condition. A couple of days before you close the transaction, you want to do that walkthrough. You want to basically go back to the property and inspect everything, make sure everything was the way you found it. There's no missing fixtures, there's not a whole lot of trash that all of a sudden appeared, there's not a frame that all of a sudden has walked away out of the property, things like that. So it's not part of the contingency of the sale. You can't go back and do a final walkthrough and say, oh, now I don't like that there's no frame, so I'm not going to close. You can't do that. But you can basically, it's your last chance as the buyer to make sure that the property is in the same condition as when you first found it. Closing is in California is not active closing like they have it on the East Coast, where they go and sit around the table and they sign the paperwork and shake hands and exchange keys. That's not the way we do it here in California. So the way that we do it here in California is, once the settlement statement is issued from escrow and all the numbers are correct from on the buyer's side and on the seller's side, then the lender produces loan docs. Those loan docs get delivered to the buyer signs them, sends them back to escrow, and escrow basically packages them, send them over to lender reviews, lender is satisfied, lender sends the money over to escrow then sends title to go down to county recorder's office, records the deed into the buyer's name, and then wires the money over to the seller, and that constitutes closing for us here in California. So it's not an active closing, it's a passive closing, meaning that the buyer and the seller don't really need to meet, and everything happens through third parties. And of course, getting keys, the fun part, right? Once you get notification from escrow that the transaction has recorded, then that's the time when the agents can go and exchange keys. And basically, it's the happy moment when you, as the buyer's agent, you get to go and meet your clients and give them their doormat, give them their champagne, give them the key, and welcome them to their new home. And of course, the last piece, which happens after, because most people don't move exactly when they get keys, so there's always a little bit of a lag time. But moving day, we like to deliver pizza on moving day, just because there's a lot that's happening, there's a lot that is going on, and we want to make sure that our customers are taken care of, that they have food, they have drinks, and we are taking care of them on that day when everything is so chaotic and so stressful. Well, thank you so much for joining me today. If you like us, please let us know. If you have any comments or suggestions, we always love those. And consider us if you are thinking of buying or selling real estate. Thank you.